Hi, welcome back everybody. Okay, got a difficult one for you today. Why do I always pick the difficult ones? Because it helps you guys out. So, okay, where do I start? Let's start with the problem. The Porsche used to handle really badly. To give you some idea of how bad, I've got a Mark IV Ford Fiesta that I used to run around in, and that handles better than the Porsche. That was the main reason why I upgraded the trailing arms to the adjustable trailing arms. It gave me the ability to adjust the camber, the caster and the toe angles. And that is only the start of the story. So stay tuned to the end to find out the whole saga of what I had to go through to get the Porsche to handle the way it should. To really understand where I'm coming from with this story, we need to go back in time. We need to go back to the late 70s, early 80s.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
Back then, the majority of cars had solid rear axles, so you had no geometry to speak of on the rear of the car to worry about. And to be honest, the front end wasn't much better. Your camber and your caster angles were really set when the car was built, and there was no provision for adjustment. The only adjustment you had was your toe, which we called tracking, or as they refer to nowadays, a toe and go. And essentially that was adjusted by a mechanical gauge that laid on the floor underneath the car and measured the angle between the two front wheels. Well, that wasn't really the end of the story, because we didn't have track day events back then like you have now. The closest you really had then was kind of amateur motorsport, and you've got to bear in mind that we didn't have access to the sort of equipment and kit that the professional motor teams had. So if you wanted to adjust your camber angle or your caster angle, you had to make your own components to make those adjustable, and then you basically had to make your own kit to measure them. The other thing is, you would set the car up for the track you were on. So for example, if it was a track with a lot of corners on it, you would set the car up to corner wheel. If it was a track that had a lot of fast straights, you would set the car up to be stable at high speed. And the other thing is you would set the car up for the driver. We all interpret how a car feels differently. So what feels right and good to me, not necessarily feel right and good to you. So as a rule of thumb, this sounds a bit evil, but what we used to do is you'd increase the caster angle until the driver complained that the steering made his arms ache, and then you would gently back it off until he stopped whining. I'm not going to go into the finer details of your geometry in this video because it's going to drag it out too long, but I'm going to put a link to this website in the description box below, because this is absolutely fantastic website. Everything you want to know about your geometry you will find on here. In actual fact, a lot of it I've copied and downloaded so I can like reference it quite quickly when I need to. And I mean, for example, you go on here, you got your camber, and as you scroll down you can see, tells you all about it. You get little like infographics that tell you about the camber and the effects that the camber has, and you can go through. There's just so much information on here. Caster angle, which is what we're talking about today, and there's loads of information on that for you to read through and find out how it affects the car and what difference it makes. So as I say, I'll drop the link in below so you can go and look at that and have a read of that. Okay, with that covered, we can now fast forward back to today. So cars have come a long way since the 70s and the 80s. Now with independent rear suspension, you can adjust pretty much the camber angle and the toe on the front of the rear of the car. And some cars you can even adjust the caster angle. And of course now you've got fancy computerized systems to check and tell you what these measurements are and whether they're correct or not. We'll come back to the word correct in a minute. So getting back to the Porsche, I said it handled really badly. It handled worse than the Fiesta. So what was really wrong with it? And that's the thing, is trying to put your finger on what the problem with the car was. The way I described it is the car was fidgety on A roads, and it just felt insecure and unstable on fast roads, on motorways and things. The way to describe it was at the sort of higher motorway speeds, the car felt like at any moment it could like veer off to the left or veer off to the right, and the steering felt super sensitive and super light, and it gave you no confidence. You felt at that speed, you felt like you needed to keep both hands on the steering wheel, and you needed to keep 100% concentration, because you just had that sense that at any second it was going to jump up and bite you. And what was happening is because that's obviously quite stressful, what would happen is subconsciously you would start to drop the speed down to around 55-60 miles an hour, so that if something did happen you got a better chance of controlling it. I took the car to a tyre bay and I wanted the caster angle increased, because if you read through the stuff from the website that I've just mentioned, you will see that increasing the caster angle makes the car far more stable at high speeds. It also makes the steering heavier, which is something that I wanted. And if the steering's heavier, you don't feel so much feedback from the road, so it just makes the car feel more secure, more planted. And the first tyre bay I went to wanted nothing to do with it. They said, "Look, we're really sorry, we can only set the car to the factory standards, because if the car's involved in an accident and it comes to light that we set the geometry of the car wrong, then we could be in trouble." Now, that's what he said about wrong and correct. That when a company are designing and building a car, the geometry is a compromise. They want the car to handle well at high speed. They want the car to handle well when you're on sort of twisty, windy A roads. And you've got to get the best of both worlds, because as we mentioned with a track, if you set a car up to be really good on straight high speed roads, you've got to give up some of that handling on corners and windy roads, and vice versa. And as I also said, that you tend to set the car up for the preferences of the driver. Well, the car company, they've got to build the car so that it feels good to a whole range of people. So they've got to kind of hit that sweet spot, that compromise. So the geometry settings that they give are a compromise. They're not right and they're not wrong. They're the best of both worlds, so to speak. So the fact that this particular place said that there were wrong settings tells me that essentially all they understand is that when they look at the computer, it tells them a set of figures and they got to check the car and adjust the car to those figures, and that's it. They don't really have a full understanding of how your camber angles and your caster angles and your toe angles affect the way the car handles. So anyway, that was that one out the window. So Not being one to give up, I went and tried another tyre bay. This tyre bay were more helpful. However, they disagreed with my interpretation of the solution. They felt that what they suggested to do was to set the car up for fast road, which meant essentially standard tow setting, a standard caster setting, and increased positive camber angles. Now, if you've read the stuff that I gave you earlier on from the website, you will probably come to the same conclusion to me. The only advantage this setup is going to give you is better cornering, and the car corners fine. I haven't got an issue with the way the car corners, but I thought, what the hell, you never know, they might be right, I might be wrong, it's not impossible. So I said, yeah, go on, we'll try that, let's do it. So we set the car up they set the car up for fast road, and unfortunately it didn't resolve the problem. It still had the same problem. Now, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. The car did corner a lot better than it did before, and it cornered as well anyway. So, but it's, you know, it's nice to have the knowledge that you've got that extra bit of leeway there if you want to corner the car. I don't really corner the car hard, but it's nice to know. But then you're back to that problem. What do you do? You know, and that's when I made the decision that I'm going to have to go old school here, which is why I gave you the insight at the start. Yeah, set it up, try it. Set it up and try it. Now, I knew from having it set to fast road that they'd set the caster angle to the standard caster angle, which is on the Boxster, is 7.5 degrees. I also know from doing research on the adjustable trailing arms when I bought them that one full turn of the arm is approximately 1 degree. So I increased the caster angle by one full turn, so it should be 8.5 degrees, but I have no way of telling. The bigger concern is the effect it's going to have on the camber angle and your toe angles, because when you change one, it does affect the others, and I've got no way of telling how much it's affected those. But here's the thing, what an amazing difference that made. It completely and totally changed the car. It was like a different car. It was amazing. Where before on A roads you were constantly working to keep the car where you wanted it, to get the position you wanted on the lane, now you were just putting the car where you wanted it. It was just a case of deciding where you wanted the car to be and putting it there. And on the motorway, it was just so planted. It was amazing. Probably shouldn't say this, but you know when you drive a car and you actually feel like you could let go of the steering wheel and the car would just carry on in a straight line. You know, it felt like that. It was beautiful. It was clear that it would stay like that above 70, if you get my drift. But the steering still felt a little light, so I was confident that it could take more. Come back to that later on as well. Anyway, so I then had the problem of hunting down a tyre bay that was prepared to do the work I needed doing, i.e. increase the camber angle more and reset the increase the caster angle more, and then reset the camber angles and reset the toe angles on the car. And eventually, after asking around and researching, I did find a place about half an hour drive from me, that were happy to do that. Amazing people to work with. They listened to you, they understood, they didn't poo-poo you, and they did the work. But we could only take the caster angle up to 9 degrees because unfortunately on the arms, that's it, that's the maximum adjustment. A little bit frustrating because again, doing some research, it turns out that most of the high performance models that Porsche produce seem to run around the 9.5 degrees mark of caster angle. So there you have it. Right, I hope you found that useful. I did the video, essentially had a viewer contact me. He was having the car skip around on the back end when he was hitting bumps and things. So we had a discussion about geometry and checking the geometry. And a neighbour of mine was having problems. He's got a Renault Clio Sport and he was having issues with the geometry on that. So that's why I thought it'd be a good idea to produce that video. With mine, the problem was obviously the caster angle, and I think that essentially is because I'm running the aftermarket wheels and they're pretty much the same spec as the GT cars, and as I mentioned, the GT cars have nearly 9.5 degrees of caster angle on them. So anyway, I've now got to go and do some shopping. If you found the video helpful and useful, please hit the like button. Please subscribe because that helps the channel. And I'll see you when I've got some more content to bring you. Thanks for watching. Bye.